we stand at the threshold of the most extraordinary transformation in human history. A metamorphosis so profound that future generations will look back at our current era as the moment when humanity began its conscious evolution from a species driven by survival instincts and ego consciousness to one guided by spiritual intelligence and divine purpose. This isn't merely optimistic speculation or wishful thinking about human potential, but rather the inevitable unfolding of evolutionary forces that Sri Aurobindo recognized and mapped with remarkable precision in his prophetic work. The human cycle, what we're witnessing today, the breakdown of old systems, the emergence of global consciousness, the yearning for meaning beyond material success, are not signs of civilization's decline, but the labor pains of humanity's spiritual birth. This transformation reveals itself most clearly when we observe the deep dissatisfaction that permeates even the most materially successful societies on Earth. The urban architect, designing gleaming city centers that house millions of people, recognizes that efficient infrastructure alone cannot address the spiritual emptiness that drives depression, addiction, and social isolation in affluent communities. The technology executive, overseeing platforms that connect billions of users, globally witnesses how digital connectivity often increases rather than diminishes human loneliness and anxiety, suggesting that our deepest needs cannot be met through external solutions alone. The medical researcher developing treatments for diseases that primarily affect wealthy nations discovers that many contemporary health challenges, stress-related disorders, autoimmune conditions, mental health crises stem from the disconnection between our accelerated lifestyles and our deeper need for meaning, community, and spiritual nourishment. This widespread sense that something fundamental is missing from modern life isn't a sign of human failure or civilizational collapse, but rather evidence that consciousness itself is outgrowing the frameworks and institutions that have sustained human society for centuries. The international diplomat working to resolve conflicts between nations increasingly recognizes that lasting peace cannot be achieved through treaties and economic agreements alone, but requires a transformation in human consciousness that recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness and shared destiny. The environmental scientist documenting climate change and ecosystem destruction understands that technological solutions, whilst necessary, cannot address the root cause of environmental crisis: humanity's disconnection from the natural world and our role as conscious participants in Earth's evolutionary journey rather than its exploiters and dominators. Sri Aurobindo's vision reveals that this crisis of meaning and purpose that characterizes our current historical moment is actually the precursor to humanity's next evolutionary leap, the emergence of what he called the Gnostic being, a form of human consciousness that operates from spiritual intelligence rather than mental calculation, from unity awareness rather than separative ego, from divine purpose rather than personal ambition. The social entrepreneur creating organizations that address poverty, education, and environmental restoration often discovers that the most effective solutions emerge not from business school strategies, but from intuitive understanding of human needs and natural systems that transcends conventional analytical thinking. The community organizer building networks of mutual support in urban neighborhoods finds that lasting social change happens when people connect with their deeper sense of purpose and shared humanity rather than simply coordinating practical assistance and resource sharing. This evolutionary transition manifests differently across various cultures and contexts, but everywhere it appears, it brings the same fundamental shift from external authority to inner guidance, from competition to collaboration, from exploitation to stewardship, from fear-based decision-making to love-based action. The regenerative farmer, developing agricultural methods that heal soil and produce abundant food without chemical inputs, discovers that working in harmony with natural cycles and ecosystem intelligence yields better results than forcing productivity through technological intervention. the alternative educator creating learning environments where children's natural curiosity and creativity flourish, recognizes that human potential unfolds most completely when nurtured through understanding and encouragement, rather than standardized testing and competitive pressure that characterize industrial education models. The prophetic nature of Sri Aurobindo's insights becomes particularly evident when we observe how current global challenges, climate change, economic inequality, political polarization, technological disruption, are simultaneously creating the conditions necessary for humanity's next stage of development. These crises cannot be resolved through the same level of consciousness that created them, but rather demand the emergence of new capacities for systems thinking, collaborative problem-solving, and long-term vision that transcend national boundaries and special interests. The renewable energy engineer, designing solar and wind installations for entire regions, participates in humanity's gradual transition from extractive to regenerative relationship with Earth's resources. The conflict resolution specialist, helping communities heal from historical trauma and build bridges across cultural divides, contributes to humanity's learning about how to transform competition and violence into cooperation and mutual flourishing. Perhaps most significantly, this spiritual birth of humanity isn't happening through dramatic external events or charismatic leaders, but through the quiet awakening of ordinary people who find themselves called to serve purposes larger than personal comfort and security. The public health nurse working in underserved communities approaches medical care as healing that addresses not only physical symptoms, but also the social and spiritual conditions that create illness and health. The independent journalist investigating corporate and governmental corruption discovers that truthful reporting becomes most effective when motivated by genuine concern for public well-being, rather than career advancement or ideological agenda. The small business owner creating local employment and community services recognizes that economic activity can either contribute to human flourishing or exploit human needs, and chooses to operate from principles that honor both profitability and social responsibility. The emergence of spiritual consciousness within human civilization reveals itself through the gradual transformation of every sphere of human activity, education, governance, economics, healthcare, technology, and creative expression as increasing numbers of people begin to approach their work and relationships from deeper sources of wisdom and compassion than purely personal interest or cultural conditioning. The museum curator developing exhibitions that explore humanity's artistic and cultural heritage finds that educational programs become most engaging when they connect historical achievements with contemporary relevance and inspire visitors to recognize their own participation in humanity's ongoing creative evolution. The urban planning consultant working with communities to design neighborhoods that support both individual privacy and social connection discovers that sustainable development emerges through understanding how physical environments can either enhance or diminish human well-being and ecological health simultaneously. This transformation becomes particularly evident in how emerging forms of leadership differ fundamentally from traditional models based on authority, control, and competition for scarce resources. The cooperative business coordinator helping worker-owned enterprises develop democratic decision-making processes learns that sustainable prosperity emerges when economic activity serves human development and community well-being rather than merely maximizing profit for distant shareholders. The restorative justice facilitator helping communities address crime and conflict through healing dialogue rather than punishment discovers that lasting safety emerges when underlying social conditions are addressed and all participants are supported in taking responsibility for collective well-being. The permaculture designer creating food forests and sustainable living systems recognizes that abundance flows naturally when human activity aligns with ecological principles rather than attempting to dominate or exploit natural processes. What makes this evolutionary transition so remarkable is how it's occurring simultaneously across cultures, continents, and social contexts, suggesting that humanity as a whole is responding to evolutionary pressures that transcend local circumstances and historical conditioning. The indigenous rights activist working to protect traditional lands and ways of life from industrial development often finds unexpected allies among urban environmentalists, sustainable technology developers, and conscious business leaders who recognize that ancient wisdom about living in harmony with natural systems provides essential guidance for creating a viable future for all humanity. The Refugee Assistance Coordinator helping displaced families rebuild their lives in new countries discovers that the most effective programs emerge when diverse communities recognize their shared humanity and mutual interdependence, rather than focusing on cultural differences and competing for limited resources. The prophetic dimension of Sri Aurobindo's vision becomes particularly clear when we observe how current technological development, artificial intelligence, global communication networks, renewable energy systems, biotechnology are creating tools that can either accelerate humanity's spiritual evolution or intensify the very problems they were designed to solve, depending on the consciousness that guides their development and application. The ethical technology researcher working to ensure artificial intelligence serves human flourishing rather than replacing human creativity and decision-making recognizes that the most important questions aren't technical but spiritual. What kinds of capabilities do we want to enhance in human beings? And what kinds of relationships do we want to create between technology and consciousness? The bioengineer developing medical treatments that work with, rather than against, natural healing processes discovers that the most effective interventions emerge from understanding life as an intelligent, self-organizing system, rather than a collection of mechanical parts to be fixed through external manipulation. This spiritual birth of humanity manifests most powerfully through the emergence of what we might call evolutionary communities, groups of people who come together around shared commitment to personal growth, social healing, and planetary well-being, rather than merely professional advancement or cultural identity. The Ecovillage Coordinator helping intentional communities develop sustainable lifestyles and governance systems based on consensus and care for all members learns that lasting social change happens through creating living examples of more conscious ways of organizing human relationships and economic activity. The holistic healthcare practitioner integrating ancient healing wisdom with modern medical knowledge approaches patient care as support for each person's natural capacity for healing and growth, rather than simply treating symptoms and managing chronic conditions through pharmaceutical intervention. Perhaps most beautifully, this transformation is revealing that what we've called individual spiritual development and collective social evolution are actually aspects of the same process, consciousness awakening to its own infinite nature and creative potential through the challenges and opportunities of embodied existence in community with others. The contemplative artist creating works that inspire reflection and inner awakening discovers that personal creative expression naturally serves collective healing and cultural transformation when it emerges from authentic connection with deeper sources of beauty and truth. The wisdom teacher sharing insights from various spiritual traditions with contemporary seekers finds that the most transformative learning happens when ancient teachings are integrated with practical engagement with current social and environmental challenges rather than being pursued as escape from worldly responsibility. The recognition that is dawning in sensitive souls across the planet is that we are not separate individuals struggling to improve ourselves and our circumstances, but rather expressions of a planetary consciousness that is awakening to its own divine nature through the apparent diversity and complexity of human experience. The community garden coordinator helping urban neighborhoods create spaces for growing food and building relationships recognizes that local food security and social connection are expressions of humanity's deeper need to remember our intimate relationship with the earth and each other as sources of nourishment and support. You know, as I share these insights about humanity's spiritual birth and our collective evolution toward higher consciousness, I'm deeply moved by the recognition that everyone watching this is already part of this extraordinary transformation. Whether you're aware of it or not, your dissatisfaction with superficial answers, your longing for deeper meaning and purpose, your sense that humanity is capable of so much more than what we see in current news headlines, these aren't signs of personal discontent, but rather evidence that evolutionary consciousness is stirring within you. This isn't just my exploration of Sri Aurobindo's prophetic vision. It's our shared awakening to our role in birthing a new phase of human civilization based on spiritual intelligence, rather than mere material advancement. I'd be deeply grateful if you join this community of conscious evolution by subscribing to this channel. But what moves me even more is recognizing that your own inner transformation and outer service are essential contributions to humanity's spiritual birth. What changes have you noticed in your own values and priorities over recent years? What work or service calls to you that feels larger than personal ambition? Your awakening matters not just to you, but to all of us who are learning to midwife this new stage of human consciousness into manifestation through our daily choices and creative contributions. The ultimate vision that emerges from Sri Aurobindo's prophetic understanding of the human cycle is that humanity's spiritual birth isn't a distant possibility or utopian dream, but rather an evolutionary inevitability that's already manifesting through countless individuals who are discovering that their deepest fulfillment comes through serving purposes larger than personal comfort and success. This transformation is creating what we might call a new species of human being, not biologically different, but operating from such expanded consciousness and integrated wisdom that their presence and actions naturally transform everything they touch toward greater harmony, creativity, and conscious collaboration. The regenerative architecture firm, designing buildings that produce more energy than they consume and create healthier environments for occupants, recognizes that sustainable construction emerges from understanding structures as living systems that support both human well-being and ecological balance, rather than merely providing shelter and demonstrating aesthetic preferences. This evolutionary emergence reveals itself most clearly through the gradual dissolution of the artificial boundaries that have separated human activity into competing categories: spiritual versus practical, individual versus collective, local versus global, human versus natural. The social impact investor directing capital toward enterprises that address poverty, environmental restoration, and community development discovers that financial returns actually increase when investments serve genuine human needs and planetary healing rather than merely extracting maximum profit from whatever markets will bear. The International Development Coordinator helping communities in emerging economies develop appropriate technology and sustainable economic systems learns that lasting prosperity emerges when development strategies honor local wisdom and natural resources rather than imposing external models that create dependency on global supply chains and foreign expertise. The prophetic nature of Sri Aurobindo's insights becomes particularly evident when we recognize that the current chaos and uncertainty in global politics, economics, and social structures isn't evidence of civilizational breakdown, but rather the necessary dissolution of outdated systems that can no longer contain or serve humanity's expanding consciousness and evolutionary potential. the systems change consultant helping organizations and communities transition from hierarchical to collaborative structures, discovers that resistance to change often dissolves when people understand that transformation serves their deepest values and aspirations rather than threatening their security and identity. The peace-building facilitator working in regions affected by historical conflict learns that lasting reconciliation happens when former enemies recognize their shared humanity and interdependent future rather than simply agreeing to stop fighting over resources and territory. This spiritual birth of humanity is creating unprecedented opportunities for conscious participation in shaping the future of civilization according to principles of wisdom, compassion, and creative collaboration, rather than merely responding to crises through fear-based policies and competitive struggles for dominance and control. The climate adaptation specialist helping coastal communities prepare for rising sea levels and changing weather patterns approaches environmental challenges as opportunities to develop greater resilience and cooperation, rather than merely defending against inevitable destruction. The educational innovator creating learning environments that nurture children's natural wisdom and creativity alongside academic skills recognizes that preparing young people for an uncertain future requires developing inner resources and collaborative capabilities, rather than simply memorizing information and competing for limited opportunities. Perhaps most significantly, this evolutionary transformation is revealing that what we've called human problems, war, poverty, environmental destruction, social inequality, are actually symptoms of consciousness that hasn't yet awakened to its own divine nature and creative potential. And therefore, these challenges will be resolved not through better technologies or more effective policies alone, but through the emergence of humans who operate from spiritual intelligence and unity awareness in all their relationships and activities. The holistic business consultant helping companies integrate social and environmental responsibility with financial viability discovers that sustainable prosperity emerges naturally when organizations align their operations with deeper purposes that serve collective well-being rather than merely maximizing shareholder returns through whatever means prove most immediately profitable. The vision that emerges through sustained contemplation of humanity's spiritual birth is that we are witnessing the emergence of a civilization based on conscious evolution rather than unconscious adaptation, collaborative creativity rather than competitive exploitation, and reverence for life rather than domination of nature and other human beings. The biomimicry researcher developing technologies that learn from natural systems rather than replacing them recognizes that human creativity reaches its highest expression when it collaborates with, rather than attempts to control the intelligence that has been successfully orchestrating life on Earth for millions of years. The contemplative psychologist helping individuals and communities heal from trauma and develop emotional resilience approaches mental health as support for each person's natural capacity for growth and contribution rather than merely managing symptoms and adjusting people to dysfunctional social conditions. The ultimate recognition that dawns through this exploration is that humanity's spiritual birth isn't something that will happen to us, but rather something that's happening through us as we learn to align our individual lives with the evolutionary intelligence that's seeking to express greater consciousness, creativity, and compassion through human activity and social organization. Every choice we make for truth over convenience, for service over self-interest, for collaboration over competition, for long-term sustainability over short-term gain, becomes a conscious contribution to birthing this new phase of human civilization that Sri Aurobindo saw emerging through the chaos and transformation of our current historical moment. The future that's seeking to emerge through humanity's spiritual awakening isn't a perfect world without challenges or difficulties, but rather a conscious world where challenges become opportunities for expressing higher human capabilities, and where difficulties become gateways to discovering creative solutions that serve all life, rather than merely addressing immediate problems through methods that create new problems elsewhere or in future generations. The consciousness that's being born in us and as us is one that can hold complexity and paradox, that can act decisively whilst remaining open to new information and changing circumstances, that can maintain local roots whilst embracing global responsibility, and that can honor individual uniqueness while serving collective evolution. As we come to the end of this exploration together, my heart is filled with profound appreciation for every soul who feels called to participate consciously in humanity's spiritual birth rather than simply observing it from the sidelines or resisting it through attachment to familiar but outdated ways of thinking and living. The prophetic vision hidden in the human cycle isn't just an intellectual framework for understanding historical cycles, but rather a living invitation to recognize our own role in midwifing the emergence of a more conscious, compassionate, and creative phase of human civilization. If these insights have awakened something in your own heart and mind, if you can feel the evolutionary currents stirring within your own life and calling you toward greater service and conscious participation, then you're already part of this beautiful birth process that's happening in and through countless individuals who are discovering their unique contributions to humanity's collective awakening. I would be deeply honored if you join our ongoing exploration by subscribing to this channel. But what moves me most is hearing about your own experiences of feeling called to participate in something larger than personal ambition or individual spiritual development. What signs of humanity's spiritual birth have you noticed in your own life and community? What service or creative work feels like your particular contribution to this evolutionary transformation? What aspects of Sri Aurobindo's vision of human destiny would you love to explore more deeply? Please share your insights, questions, and experiences in the comments below. Your journey of conscious evolution illuminates possibilities for all of us who are learning to birth this new phase of human consciousness through our daily choices, relationships, and creative contributions. This isn't just about understanding spiritual teachings or feeling inspired by visionary ideas. It's about living as conscious participants in the most extraordinary transformation in human history. And your awakening and service are essential threads in the tapestry of humanity's spiritual birth.